introduce Kristina Motley and Tim Carney from the Maryland Environmental Service. The Maryland Environmental Service, or MES, was established in 1970 by the state of Maryland to, quote, assist with the preservation, improvement, and management of the quality of air, land, water, and natural resources, and to promote the health and welfare of the citizens of the state. So very important work there. MES currently operates over 1,000 environmental projects across the Mid-Atlantic, including ecosystem restoration at Poplar Island in the Chesapeake Bay. Tim and Kristina are senior environmental specialists with MES, and Tim also conducts bi-monthly bird censuses. Like many of you, I also know Tim as a Maryland eBird reviewer and as a leader of bird walks at Swan Creek, Hart Miller Island, and Masonville Cove. So without further ado, Tim and Kristina can take it away.
Alrighty, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen.
Sarah, okay. Did I? Speaker view. Is that side-by-side speaker? Yeah, okay.
And then I think we'll be hearing echo from the group there.
All right, I'm going to see if I can mute everyone. Okay, I'm going to mute everyone. If I accidentally mute you, Tim and Kristina, unmute yourself, but I think as co-hosts you wouldn't. Oh, well, actually, I'll leave that.
All right, so everybody see the screen? Perfect. So, like we said, my name is Kristina Motley. I am a senior environmental specialist here on Poplar Island, and I work on Poplar Island mainly doing the outreach. So, what Poplar Island is, the big name is the Paul S. Sarbanes Ecosystem Restoration Project. And it is funded by two main organizations, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, as well as the Port of Baltimore. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers funds 75% of the project, and the Port of Baltimore, the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Port Administration, funds the remaining 25% of the project. And then myself and Tim's organization, which is Maryland Environmental Service, funds the remaining 25% of the project. So when we talk about Poplar Island, we first like to go back in time a little bit to the year 1847. This is a historic map of 1861. And the reason we go back in time is that's when they conducted the first land survey on the island. And when they conducted the first land survey on the island, they found that the island was about 1,140 acres in size. It was a fairly large island. During the late 1800s, early 1900s. It housed a town called Valiant, where there was about 100 individuals on the town. There was about 10 farms. There was a schoolhouse / church. There was a general store. There was a post office, and there was a sawmill. So here's a map of how it looked like in the early 1900s. So you can see we have the town of Valiant here. We have a couple of the farms, and then you can also see the schoolhouse / church and everything that I was talking about. But as the years went on, Poplar Island was very much affected by erosion. And so the island started to erode away. It was estimated that it was eroding away at about 15 to 20 feet per year. And it was just very rapidly eroding away. By the 1920s, everybody on the Valiant had to move off the island. And then by the 1960s here, the island was owned by the the Democratic National Party. And so it went through a variety of different owners over the years. At one point, it was owned by Campbell's Soup. It was owned by the Democratic National Party. It was owned by the Smithsonian. It was owned by a bunch of lawyers. It was owned by a family. But it still continued to experience that massive erosional forces, the wind, the waves, and the rain. And in 1993, Poplar Island looked like this. So there really wasn't much left. So all that was left in 1993 were these 4 tiny remnant islands. And those remnant islands were less than 5 acres in size in totality. So the island went from over 1,000 acres in the 1800s to less than 5 in the early 1990s. That Poplar Island lost over 99% of its landmass. It was estimated that at that time, it was estimated in 1993 that the entirety of Poplar Island would be washed away by the year 2000. However, we are well past the year 2000, and the island now looks like this. So we were able to find a solution. And so the solution we come from, that we got to, actually comes from the Port of Baltimore. So the Port of Baltimore is a huge port city, and the reason why we're able to, why they are so important is because we need to make sure we keep the federal navigation channels clear for the commerce, and to do that we need to do periodic dredging. So I have a little bit of a video here that shows why we need to dredge those shipping channels. And let's make sure it plays. I should have the audio set, but just put me in the chat if things aren't sounding really well.
Over time, wind, tides, and runoff cause sediments to accumulate, which could block shipping channels. The process of periodically clearing the material from shipping channels is referred to as maintenance dredging. To maintain the channel's proper depth, a clamshell bucket and crane barge are used to remove sediment and place it in a flat-bottom scow, which is then towed away to a containment facility. In order to protect the marine environment, maintenance dredging typically takes place in fall and winter. Approximately 5 million cubic yards are cleared from the Chesapeake Bay channels each year. Of that, 1.5 million cubic yards are removed from the Baltimore Harbor alone.
Perfect. Nope, there we go. So the reason why I want to keep the Port of Baltimore open for business is because it is a huge economic hub, not only for the state of Maryland, but for the nation as a whole. So the Port of Baltimore generates over 30,000 Maryland jobs. Over 15,000 of those will be direct jobs directly attributed to the Port of Baltimore. Every year, the Port of Baltimore generates about $3.3 billion in wages, and it has about $375 million in state and local tax revenues annually. The Port of Baltimore ranks #1 in the nation for the import of small cars and trucks. We call them RoRos, the roll-on, roll-off heavy equipments. We're also #1 in the nation for the import of sugar and gypsum. If you ever are in the Baltimore Harbor area, you might have seen the Domino Sugar Factory. We're #2 in the export of coal, but you can't be #1 in everything, so I guess we'll take that one. Baltimore ranks 9th in the total in foreign cargo value. We get over 10 million tons of cargo passed through the port in 2018, and then Baltimore ranks 11th in the total cargo tonnage in the United States. So it's a huge economic hub for Maryland and everything. So we want to make sure to keep that Port of Baltimore viable. So the dredging that creates the island, what we need to do first is we need to prepare the island for the dredged material. So what we do is we build the perimeter of the island first, and we build it out of a very specialized material called armor stone. If you guys ever been to Poplar Island, you might have noticed that the entirety of the island is covered in this stone. Looks very much like riprap. If you know of that term, it's what they use to bolster the shoreline in a lot of areas. It differs from riprap because it is actually much heavier. Armor stone ranges from about 200 to 4,000 pounds and is very specifically placed, very specifically cut and very specifically quality checked. You can see we have a piece of equipment here. They're pretty much moving one stone at a time. So these rocks are very meticulously engineered and placed to make sure that we are optimizing the effect of them to make sure that they do their job, which is protecting the island from erosion. It's estimated that when we do this, it will take about 150 years for the island, for that armor stone to even start seeing the effects of erosion, which is very nice because we don't want what happened to Poplar Island in the past to happen in the future. After we done the perimeter of the island, we then separated the island out into smaller pieces that we call cells. So these cells are just smaller pieces of the island just because it is much more easier to restore a small portion of the island than it is to restore the entire 1,140 acres at a time. So depending on where we're at in our construction timeline will depend on what those cells are used for. We have two main types of habitat in our cells. We have our wetland cells, which will have a lot of our wetland habitats, and those are primarily on the east side of the island. And then we have our upland cells, which is going to be primarily our forest, our shrub, meadows, and maybe some freshwater ponds, but we're not quite there yet with our upland cells. We're going to start restoring our first one of those in 2027. So after our cells are prepared to receive that material, we then start dredging, where they dredge the channels using what we call a clamshell bucket, and they place them in a flat bottom boat called a scow. Those scows can hold about 8,000 cubic yards of dredge material. And once those scows are filled up, they are then tugged over to Poplar Island to then be brought to whichever cell is receiving that material. However, we're not able to just park that scow right next to whatever cell it needs to go to. What we need to do is we need to attach it to an unloader area where it is then mixed in with water. So that dredge material is mixed in with water. It's about 90% water, 10% dredge material, and it's done that way to create what we call a slurry. And that just helps us hydraulically pump that material to whichever cell it needs to go to. So we do hydraulically pump it to the cells. After it is within the cells, we let it settle out. So we let the material settle on the bottom and the water settle on top, but we don't need that water anymore. So we will release that water back out into the bay only after it meets our quality standards. We have set standards set by the Maryland Department for the Environment. And if they don't meet those standards, we will not release that water out into the bay. But if they do, we will release that water back out into the bay. And then we go through a process that we call crust management. So we want to dry out that dredge material as much as we can. And to create a nice crust over the land is what you see here. And that just helps us two ways. One, it helps us so that we can take as much water out of the material as we can, because the more water we take out, the more dredge material we put on top. Helps us optimize the capacity in that way. But also, the more compact the material is, the more we're able to bring on our specialized machinery to create habitat for our island. So Poplar Island has 3 different habitat types. So we have our uplands, which will be 829 acres of forest, meadows, and shrub, like I mentioned before. And then we have our wetland habitats, which will be 776 acres of low and high marsh. Those are, if you've been there recently, those are the established completed habitats that we have at the moment. We have about 380 acres completed so far. And then we have an open water embayment area that is 110 acres as well. So the habitat restoration of our wetland cells, what we'll do is after the cell receives its last little bit of dredge material, we'll then grade the elevation to wherever our low marsh and high marsh is situated, as well as our channel systems. And then we also have certain habitat features that we've created to target certain species. So after that's done, we're then able to plant. So we have what a cell would look like that is ready for planting. We usually start in the beginning of the year of April, May. And as you can see here, you can see the individual plant plugs. So all of our wetland cells are hand planted, and they, depending on how big they are, they can have over 100,000, and our largest cell has over 500,000 individually planted plant plugs. But as you can see, it does not take long for that habitat to grow in and to create the lush habitat that you'll see on Poplar Island today. So the dredge material is very highly nutrient rich so that our plants grow very, very well in our restored habitats. The project has three main goals. I mentioned them a little bit earlier. First one is we want to optimize that capacity for the dredge material. I mentioned a little bit with the crust management, but this island would not even exist without the need to beneficially use that dredge material from the approach channels going to the Baltimore Harbor that we need to make sure to keep the Port of Baltimore viable. So we want to make sure we're doing that. Our second goal is we want to restore this remote island habitat. This remote island habitat is very important to our native animals as well as our migratory animals. So the reason why these remote islands are so important is because they're separated from the mainland, which means they're separated from a lot of the mainland hazards and the mainland predators. So a lot of our animals, especially our migrants, will be attracted to these islands as either their final destination or as a spot to rest and refuel. Because just like when we have to go on long road trips, we have to do pit stops to rest and refuel, our migratory animals need to do the same thing. And then our last goal is we need to make sure we cause no harm to the environment. We take this very, very seriously. I mentioned we do a lot of, do the water quality monitoring. We do a lot of monitoring on site. We have a lot of standards that are set by the MDE, a lot of safety protocol that we have to follow. And so we really look to make sure we cause no harm to the environment with all the practices that we do. So I'm going to hand it over to Tim. I don't know. Let's see. I don't know if you can grab control over the screen, Tim, or if you just want to do next slide type of thing.
Let's see. Request. Did that work?
I approve, yeah.
All right, let me test it real quick. So what? I'm on a MacBook. I don't know if the controls are the same. I haven't used this on Mac before. How do I go forward and back? Is it just the arrows, or?
I'm clicking it because that's what I've been doing.
Can you click me back? Actually, you know what? Let's just start here. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having us. We really enjoyed giving this talk. I know a lot of people have been to Poplar, and I know a lot of people would like to get out there. And I think that it's really good to kind of do the backstory as well, so things make a little more sense when you do visit. And I also, Kristina's very humble. She never mentions this, but when she's not driving birders around or giving presentations, she does a significant amount of raptor rescue on her personal time. So she travels to pick up injured or sick raptors and then drives them to whichever rehab center they need to go to. And I don't know if anybody heard about Swainson's hawk that was found injured, I think in Frederick County a few years ago, but she was involved with successfully transporting that. And it's still with us. It just can't be released in the wild. So it's going to be an educational bird. So next time you see Kristina, just make sure you thank her. So with that, I'm Tim. I know some of you in person, and I know some of you from eBird Review. I've been with Maryland Environmental Service for about 12 and a half years now, and I've been doing poplar bird counts. It'll be 9 years in late October. I go out twice a month, weather permitting, and I've only missed, I think, 4 since I started, all because of like winter weather, just couldn't get down there. So, is this your slide or is this my slide? Sorry guys, we just put together a new presentation and we're still trying to figure out the rhythm of it. But Kristina, is this
this is your slide.
All right, let's just go with it. So I don't know how much I want to go back, but before we even started construction on Poplar, there was a lot of kind of general guidelines. like, okay, you can build the island, but we want habitat for colonial water birds. And then they kind of left it up to us to decide how to make that happen. So one of my other tasks at work is the adaptive management plan, which is a gigantic document of like all of these boxes to be checked for the restoration. So we monitor everything. We don't just build it and let it go. We monitor it and we survey everything every year, sometimes every month, and just keep track of where everything is. So as of now, we have a few nesting islands that are fully vegetated, some that are rebounding after the cormorants took over one year, and they have very acidic droppings that killed all the vegetation that the herons were using as a rookery. Fortunately, the herons just moved to a different island that they had never used before. It's really interesting how things work out there, and how just one year, like, you think there's a pattern and then something completely different happens. But we do have those nesting islands. We have hummocks, which are like raised bushy areas out in the marsh. They are for, I think they're for black ducks, but we found that gadwall are using them. Some of the only breeding gadwall in the state are using these hummocks, high marsh ponds, and mud flats. So the undeveloped cells that haven't been planted serve as mud flats, but they're all going to be developed in time. But there are still natural mud flats in the wetland cells, so the shorebirds will still have habitat. It just won't be a giant 100-acre cell. Let me see if my MacBook wants to cooperate. Do we go forward? No. Yes, we did. It's just really slow.
Sorry, that
okay.
was me.
Oh,
Just
that's
let me
you.
know when you want
Okay.
to change. Yeah, just let me know when
Can
you
I
want to change slides.
Okay, I don't want to next slide you or anything, but I guess I have to. So bird monitoring. One time my great uncle kind of laughed at me. He's like, they pay you to count birds? Like, why does that matter? And I get that sometimes, but to most people, maybe it's not the biggest deal in the world, but for people like us and the people working on the project, like the bird monitoring is like such a metric for habitat success. We can say 3 years ago, this was an undeveloped cell and this species wasn't here. 2 years ago, we planted it. Last year, the vegetation finally took, the species showed up, and now this year it's breeding. It worked, you know, so we can, like, the example I always use is common gallinule. Like, they are now in almost all of the wetland cells, but you will never see them in an undeveloped cell. But as soon as that vegetation takes, a pair or two kind of move in out into the wetland cells. The second bullet, we don't have a lot of great shorebird spots in Maryland, especially not being monitored this much. So the data collected during the bird censuses is useful to figure out kind of what's migrating and when, that we wouldn't get otherwise from many places. It's not Delaware, it's not Bombay Hook, like it's Maryland. There's not a lot of mud flats. And the third bullet, it's a great outreach tool. Hey, birding community, we have all these great birds. Come see them, and while you're here, let us kind of show you what we do. Let us kind of prove to you that we aren't some covert government operation. There's actually like somewhere on YouTube, there's a documentary about Poplar Island that insinuates we're doing like secret government testing and stuff. We're not. There's a lab, we do water testing. That's about it. So we do like to bring a lot of people out there to really show them what we're doing, because not everyone fully understands what happens when an island is just kind of built out in the bay, especially the locals. We definitely want to make sure that they kind of understand what we're doing. So next slide. Okay, Jan Reese began the censuses in late 2002. He is kind of legendary in the Talbot County birding community. He has been surveying everything forever, including all the remote islands. He decided that he was good in 2013, and they offered it to me because I already worked here, and I love birding, and I had to learn shorebirds really quickly, but I think it worked out. So a few things. I do a census kind of based on my intuition. It's not point counts. It's not very, I hate to say it's not science or like replicable, but it's not. It's more like an idea of usage. It's I try to get as many birds as I can when I'm there in 7.5 hours or less. And sometimes I can't go to certain parts of the island. So to run statistics on my data would just not be a good idea, because it would show like these huge drops and these huge increases when that might not be the case. And then also one time I went out to count the heron colony and they were all gone because someone flushed them because they were doing work out there. So it's really like, it's an unusual approach, but the goal is to show what's using which cell, and try to build the species list. And I also don't do nest or chick surveys. We have entire teams for that, which I'll get to. Next slide. So those teams are U.S. Geological Survey and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have a tern team that goes out and they actually count and mark all the common tern and least tern nests, and then they will band the nestlings as soon as they hatch. And then throughout the season, they'll do like a mark reef site where they will actually just sit there for hours with a scope and try to read the bands on the birds to figure out like which ones are still with us or which ones left or which ones didn't make it. They also go in and they do a full heron. We call it a heronry. Most people call it a rookery, but the heron egret ibis colony in cell 1C. And then we kind of all pay attention to some of the specialty breeders. So clockwise from left, American oyster catcher. They used to breed out there all the time and then they stopped. We don't know why. That's, you know, one of the mysteries. Upper right, seaside sparrow, they keep increasing every year. The more wetlands we develop, the more seaside sparrow habitat there is. Bottom right is one of my favorites. That's a shoveler brood. There's one breeding record of shoveler in Maryland. I want to say Blackwater, 1985. And then poplar. The past 2 or 3 years, we've had shovelers breeding. There are multiple pairs breeding. You know, so another like habitat success metric. And then the blackneck stilts, which I believe I finally got my first 3-digit count this season. They just keep increasing in numbers and utilizing different parts of the island. And you'll see 40 or 50 in one cell when they're staging to migrate. So really high numbers of stilts. Next slide. So between all of the PIs, the project investigators and myself, we have agreed upon 253 species for the island, 245 on site, and 8 either in the water offshore or on one of the outlying islands that just hasn't made contact with something that we've built. So one is tufted titmouse, which is on Coach's Island in the Pines, but just has not been on Poplar itself yet. Another is brown booby. There's an offshore record, but it never like went onto the island or like came within the boundaries. So we do kind of separate the two. Most recent was Nashville warbler. I think we'll keep getting more land birds as we develop the uplands. So 33 species confirmed as breeding this year, 44 total since we began work. restoring the island. With that 33, I think there are a lot more that we just didn't find the nest this year. Like I still have not found the gallinule chick, but I know there are about 5 or 6 pairs out there. Next slide. Another record year for the cell 1C heronry. So the number on the left, like 369, is this year's number of pairs. And then the number in parentheses is last year's. So the heronry team, they don't try to identify the egrets by species because the nestlings all kind of look the same until they, fully fledge and you can see more of the bill color and leg color. But you can see like the numbers are mostly way up. We had 162 glossy ibis pairs this year, 70 to 72 last year, and they are all in that, hopefully everybody can see it, that upper right photo, that center slightly darker vegetation, that's the habitat island, and all the little white dots on it are the birds. I'll normally see about 40 or 50 birds at a time. There are hundreds hidden in there, and every morning at sunrise, a lot of them actually leave and they go to the mainland. So they're gone by the time I even get out to the island. So I really rely on the project investigators to do the nest counts to give an idea of just how many birds are out there. Next slide. Common terns, common and least terns. So common terns are state endangered breeders. Least terns are state threatened breeders. We have the most successful and the largest colony of common terns in Maryland. Skimmer Island's also doing, I think it's doing well. The offshore barge at Masonville has a colony with like 60 pairs, but we had 440 common tern pairs and 431 least tern nesting pairs this year. I believe most of the nestlings were banded. Next slide. Not just breeding birds, but also the transient birds and the wintering specialties. There was one day in 2014 where I got almost 25,000 ducks, which was incredibly difficult to count. I had to actually just take photos and count them on my computer over a few days. There were just so many ducks out there. I don't want to say fortunately that hasn't happened again, but it is really challenging. That was the really deep freeze, I think, and it drove them out to the island. Most we get all the shorebirds, like the buff-breasted sandpiper in the upper right. We have overwintering bittern, black-crowned night heron, and short-eared owl. I'm not aware of anywhere else in Talbot County that has them. I'm actually not sure of many places on the middle or upper shore that has them overwintering. Once you get down to Blackwater, it changes, but in the middle and upper shore. And then snowy owls, we seem to be, it's poplar or assateague that seem to get the first one each season. The kind of is like the pioneer. We just know if it's going to be a big year if we get one in November. Next slide. So shorebirds. This normally is more interactive when I do it in person. I kind of have everybody like shout things out about how these birds are different because shorebirds are really tough to learn. These are some of the eye-catching ones. Top row there's an American golden plover, then a Hudsonian godwit, then a long-billed dowitcher. Bottom left is a semi-palmated plover. Yes, they're mostly brown and gray, but they're really beautiful birds. Like the patterns are incredible if you get to see them up close. I really enjoy watching them and I really enjoy getting to study them up close. But next slide should be what you normally get, like this. There are just hundreds of tiny brown dots running around, thousands of tiny brown dots sometimes. I have learned the art of counting by 50s and hundreds sometimes because you want to get the most precise counts that you can, but we have very active peregrine falcons and bald eagles. And when I started, I would try to count individual birds that the peregrine would fly over, and the birds would all leave. So it was really frustrating at first. So now I try to take more of like a snapshot and count by some, you know, increment. I've tried to get it down to counting by 10 just to get as precise as I can. But these birds, the minute anything flies over, they all pick up, they move somewhere else, and then you have to ID them by species and do species compositions, which is just really time consuming. But it's also kind of fun if you're like nerdy like me and you also want really good data. And if I have the time, I will really try to look at whatever's close enough to try to find some rare ones. Next slide. Again, this would be the interactive part where I'd ask you which one of these 5 birds is different, but I'll just tell you it's the bottom left bird. That's a stilt sandpiper because it has that slight droop at the end of the bill. The rest are lesser yellow legs. And if you look really closely, the stilt sandpiper has slightly less yellow legs than the lesser yellow legs. It's more of like a dull greenish yellow. But these are 2 completely different species, different genus, different migration, and they look almost the same. That's kind of how close you have to be to differentiate. Next slide. These are not different species, but should be. On the left is an eastern willet, on the right is a western willet. They are completely different structurally. You can see the bird on the right is so much taller, longer legged, longer billed. They breed in different places. They have different migration routes. Eastern willet breeds on poplar. Western shows up in late July. But these, for some reason, are still considered the same species. I'm hoping they split them soon so I can get a new bird on my list, but we'll see. Next slide. Another audience participation one. I try to see who can figure out which birds are different and why, but for now, the front 3 on the right are petrel sandpipers. Notice the really, really dense streaking on the breast that kind of ends abruptly. It's like a cleanly demarcated from the white belly. They also have yellow legs. Front left bird is slightly larger. Wings go a little bit past the tail. And it's a little flatter, almost like it got like smushed. That's a white rump sandpiper, and the rest are semi-palmated sandpipers. So, you know, a new person, even when I started, I really struggled with this. I had to pester poor Matt Hafner just all the time and send him my pictures and just ask him to tell me like what was in the photos. And that's how I learned, was actually like taking pictures and having someone coach me through what I had captured. For me, I have to learn it in the moment. But again, this is just how similar they are. Next slide. So these are not different species, even though the front 4 are orange and the back is gray. These are all short-billed dowitchers. One's just in, I guess, winter plumage and the others are not. So these birds are completely different colors, but they're the same species. So you also have to learn age and molt patterns to ID shorebirds, and you need to get really close in order to do that. Next slide. So enough about that. This is where I go into some of my personal favorite poplar highlights. In September 2017, I found a Sabin's gull on poplar. I walked right up to it. It was like a laughing gull. They just don't care. They're not afraid of anything. And we were very lucky that there was a birding tour that day. So they put everybody in a different vehicle that was able to get up to that cell, which is a little bit tricky. And everybody on the birding tour and some of my coworkers got to see it. It's never happened again. It was the first island record, the second for the county. They breed in the Arctic and they winter on the ocean. So Y1 was at Poplar Island in September. I guess we just got lucky, but that seems to be the pattern. Like if we get them in Maryland or DC, it's usually September, October. So now is the time. So go look. Next slide. This is another favorite, my one and only piping plover on site. notice all the different colored bands on the bird's legs. So I think there are like 4 bands. There are 2 on the right, 2 on the left, all different colors, different materials, I think, different codes. This bird, the piping plover people, I forget the name, like the Piping Plover Society of North, I don't know. They named this one Little Cooper when they banded it. There's a whole biography of Little Cooper on their website where they track what he does every year. He hatched and was banded in Michigan in 2012. Someone recited him in January 2018 in Florida. Then I had him July 2019 on Poplar. And they have him come back to Ontario every year and breed. And I think I looked it up. I think the last record was like 2020. Hopefully he's still with us, but if not, you know, these birds don't live super long. But it's really interesting to like have the opportunity to learn like one bird's full life story like this. So I always like to include this slide. Next slide. This is my current favorite. So Carolina wren has annoyed me for years on Poplar. They sing in the trees, the short trees by the buildings, the MES trailers. They have done this for years, and I've never found a nest, and I've never found a fledgling. And you know, we track breeding species on site, and I still just could not figure out where this bird was nesting, and I just couldn't prove it. Like I knew it was there, it was in safe dates, but I just could not prove it. So this June, I saw one fly into an open barn. So we have this wooden pole barn, and the front is just open. We keep there's a lumber pile, there's some heavy equipment, and there's like a hay bale in it. And the bird just went right behind the beam. The nest was just so obviously right there. I finally confirmed it, and then I saw a second Carolina wren take food and fly to a different area of the barn, and I figured there was the second nest. So I climbed up to see if I could find the second nest. Next slide. And I found a barn owl nest instead, which was just like probably my favorite thing that's happened on Poplar Island. I climbed up on the back of this thing called a Marshmaster, which is an amphibious vehicle. It drives and it floats. We use it to get out into the wetlands where you couldn't take a truck, or you need more power than like a canoe. And it was just being stored in this barn, and there's a barn owl. And we didn't see the egg at first. And I told my coworkers, I'm like, there's a barn owl, it's not moving. It's either on a nest or it's sick. Either way, we need to really investigate. So we gently like nudged the bottom of her wing to the side, and she just lifted up a little bit, and we saw an egg, and just immediately everybody kind of sprang into action because they were going to use the Marshmaster, which is very loud and noisy, on the following day. And I said, we can't touch this. We have to. I'm really sorry about the work that you guys are about to do, but like this is incredible, and we really need to like let this bird just carry out whatever it's doing. And now we're talking about installing barn owl boxes on site, so that the barn owls can still nest, but we can also use our Marshmaster. Next slide. So 6 eggs, 5 of them hatched. The 6th one is just still in there. It's not viable. They banded all 5 owlets on August 24th. And they also noticed that the female is banded, but they just could not get close enough to read the band. So if we can get close enough to the female, then we can also figure out where she came from. But they're going to fledge any day now. And the female, actually, neither of the adults have been in the Marshmaster with them. We try to limit visitation, but we do go up and check just to make sure all 5 are still there. I haven't seen an adult since probably late July. I don't think. Kristina, have you seen an adult recently? Or is it just the 5?
I've only seen the 5. I actually looked today and I only saw 4, but you know how they pile onto each other. The last time I saw an adult was
Yeah,
probably
it
the
was
same time as you.
it was a while ago. But yeah, I normally only see 3 or 4 at a time because they all cluster together, and I get worried that like 1 or 2 died or got predated or something, and then like a head will pop up. So all 5 are still there. So they're banded, and I hope they come back and use a box next season. Next slide. Birding tours. This is Kristina. She is your point of contact, but I usually include this in my presentations where she's not with me. I think we generally try to do 1 to 2 a month. They run April through October. The boat leaves Tillman Island at 9 a.m. and we have you back at 1 p.m. 24 people max is how many guests we can fit on the boat. So email either one of us if you'd like to be added to the mailing list. Next slide. Most of you are on eBird. I just like to put this out there for perspective of how we rank. I believe there are over 1,800 hotspots in Maryland, and the 4 MES sites where I do my censuses are number 21 or above out of 1,800 for total species. So Poplar is currently at number 21, but remember there is no forest. Once we get more wooded habitat, I think we're going to add a lot of species to the list. And notice that eBird lists 257 species, but my official list has 253. That's because people are wrong, which is fine. But there are some birds that have been reported out on Poplar where, to be as diplomatic as possible, I would really like to see a picture before I include it on my official list. And I also think some of the birds that people have eBirded at Poplar were at land base, and they just they put the whole trip on the Poplar hotspot, which is not the end of the world, but for my official list that I curate, I want to make sure that it's like it has been fully documented as being on the island or in the offshore waters or outlying islands that you can see or hear from the site. So hopefully I don't know, there are a few easy ones that we don't have a sapsucker yet. Just something else, I can't believe we still don't have one. One of the warblers, I just figured I would have got bay-breasted. I still don't have a bay-breasted warbler. I figured one would like pop over in late September, because we have blue wing, Blackburnian, orange crown, Nashville, Tennessee, just not a bay-breasted yet. So I'll look next week. Next slide. Okay, last slide actually. So, wait, can we go back? I think it went off.
Yeah, I don't know what happened with that one. Hold on.
That's all right. It's fine. It's basically just if you want to go birding at, we call it Cox Creek internally, but it's Swan Creek. Oh, it's fine. It just keeps going away. But I'll just tell it. So if you want to go birding at Swan Creek or Hart Miller, birding tours at menv.com. Mary, Edward, Nancy, Victor. menv.com is my mailing list. If you want to go birding on Poplar tours at menv.com. That's Kristina's mailing list. And if you forget them, just email me and I can figure out where to send you. Carney at menv.com. Also starting to include some Masonville stuff in my email list. So I believe that's the last slide, so we can take some questions.
Thank you so much, Tim and Kristina. That was really great. Okay, I'm going to take questions both from in the room and by. Oh, okay.
Chat doesn't seem to be working.
Oh, is the chat? No, I was wondering. Okay, let me see.
But you can ask your questions.
Well, I can't. Okay. All right. I guess I'll try to be orderly about it, but I'll let people on Zoom sort of call out their questions while I scan the room for questions. Okay, Cheryl has a question.
Hi, I'm wondering about the dredged material and whether it has anything like heavy metals or PCBs or anything like that that is of concern when you build the island with it.
So yeah, I can answer that one. So every 3 years, that dredge material is tested. So just like the water quality, we have set standards that are set by the Maryland Port for the environment. And if they don't meet those standards, we don't use it. To date, it hasn't ever exceeded those standards. So our dredge material is classified with how we're using it. So our dredge material is classified as material that's going to be used for habitat restoration. So it has been vetted and made safe for use in habitat restoration.
Scott has a question.
So I imagine you're going to have to keep dredging the Baltimore Harbor for a long time. Do you have plans for other islands to be placed in the bay?
We do. So the dredging team has to have a plan about 20 years out every year. So Poplar Island is slated to be completed in 2044. So we have to plan beyond that. So we have 2 islands in a project that we call our Mid-Chesapeake Bay Island Project. And those 2 islands are Barren Island, which is going to be primarily wetland habitat. And then we have James Island, which is going to be like Poplar Island 2.0, which will be both wetland and upland habitat. It'll be much larger. It'll be about 2,000 acres. Poplar Island is currently over, it's exactly 1,715. And so it'll also have a lot more capacity in James. So Poplar Island, our capacity is about 68 million cubic yards, and James will have about 90 million cubic yards.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Did you guys at the meeting
When you were talking?
Yeah, there's a crazy echo on my end. I don't know if it's on everybody else's.
Okay.
But I was gonna.
I don't know if that's really. Then no one will hear. I don't think you can hear if we can't hear them if they do that. So I'll turn on. Yeah. I'll turn off the microphone.
Oh, okay.
Does anyone else here have questions? You want to come or do you want me to?
I think you should stand over here because you're too close to the speakers.
I had a question about when you were talking about your erosion rock and the idea that it was designed so that it would prevent the erosion, so for 150 years and so on. I wondered if some of the changes that seem to be happening much more quickly in climate change in terms of sea level rise, do you think, are you looking at trying to account in that how you continue your design for erosion rock, or are you doing some analysis to see whether in fact those changes are going to change what your assumptions are?
Yes. So for the feedback, if you want to mute the computer where you guys are at, that might help. Because I'll just mute you and not me. All right, good. I don't hear any feedback from you guys. I hear me. So with concerns with sea level rise and other, just environmental concerns. So we have a working group where we have all of our project partners that come together to talk about this type of stuff. And in concerns with sea level rise, we have the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science that is doing the research on the sedimentation and the elevation of our wetland cells and how it is accumulating and keeping up with projected, well, historic projected sea level rise. So we have these surface elevation tables that measure the accumulation of the wetland cell to the millimeter. And so to date, we have been able to keep in line with current sea level rise, and especially compared to our other reference sites, which are sites that we compare Poplar Island to around the area, we are definitely doing much better. So we have seen a little bit of a phenomenon that we call marching back of the marsh, where we have a certain ratio of low marsh and high marsh habitat. And we've noticed that over the years, the low marsh will kind of march back or creep up on the high marsh. So we have to have a certain ratio of low marsh to high marsh, like I mentioned before. And what we've just done is just change that ratio with ourselves moving forward. So it is on everybody's mind. We are doing a lot of research on it, and we are doing a lot of things. But like I said, we are currently keeping up with historic projected sea level rise. That's not to say things can change, because things always change with science. But we're doing a lot. That's one of the main benefits of having what we call an adaptive management plan. We're constantly able to adapt and to, evolve our practices and always try to do better to make sure we're keeping up with the most, recent research and go from there.
I wanted to go back to Scott's real quick, if there's time, but you said dredging the Baltimore Harbor. So one thing to keep in mind is, as of now, we can't take material out of the harbor from the harbor. So if you dredge the harbor, it has to go to Masonville or Swan Creek, which is why there's so much construction at both right now and why access is so limited, because they're raising the dikes up to, I think Swan Creek was like 39.6 feet. They're raising them up to 60, I think, just so there's that much more capacity for the dredge material. And there's also a brand new, maybe 5 or 10 year program called Innovative Reuse, where they're trying to figure out what else you can do with dredge material instead of just inflowing it into a containment facility. Like, can you use it for road fill? Can you use it for landfill daily covered? Can you use it for this? So that's like a whole new department. Because anything from the harbor has to stay in the harbor. And because of that, anything from the bay, we don't let in the harbor because there's not room. So that's kind of why Mid-Bay is online. And Mid-Bay, most of it's off of Taylor's Island in Dorchester County. I don't have time to do bird stuff down there, but I really can't wait to see what they start finding when they start surveying it. So.
Yes. Yeah, Poplar Island, we only receive material from what we call the approach channels. There's an imaginary line at the end of the Patapsco River, which is a river that goes into the Port of Baltimore, called the North Point Rock Point line, anywhere there below. So if you remember the video I showed in the PowerPoint, it says we dredge about 5 million cubic yards a year. Only about 1.5 of them goes to our other sites within the Baltimore Harbor area. The rest from the approach channels will come to Poplar Island. So the room is still muted on our end. So if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Right.
There we go.
I got it. Okay. Thank you so much, Tim and Kristina. That was really wonderful. You had our entire room here enthralled. Tim's bird humor went over really well. Lots of laughs and lots of interest. And I'm sure that everyone here will be trying to get onto your walks and your tours. Yeah.
Many more to come. Thank you.
So thanks. If that's all, or any more business?
No, I think you could say that there was about equal participation by Zoom and by attendance.
Yeah, we had a really good participation. Yeah, and about half and half. So we'll keep this up. Okay. Yeah, I think we're going to close up around here. Tam and Christina, you can leave as you please. The meeting participants, does anyone have any concerns about the way the hybrid meeting turned out?
You can also send emails.
Yeah, send emails. Okay, great, Janet. I see your comment. Okay. Well, anyway, we have. We have another month to work out any bugs. If you think of anything, please let me know. And so I'm going to end this meeting, and we'll see you next time. There'll be more MailChimps to let you know what's going on.
Thanks for having us.
Recording first.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Here first. Stop the recording maybe first. I don't know.
I have no idea.
I don't know either.
Yes.